The independent panel review of Benghazi is out, and you know what?
Mistakes were made, lives were lost, and lessons need to be learned.
It says that mistakes were made.
The State Department clearly failed the Boy Scout motto of be prepared.
There's no question that there were people within the State Department that were remiss and did not execute in an appropriate way.
Just into the Fox newsroom, it appears heads are starting to roll after that Benghazi report issued late yesterday.
There were mistakes made at our consulate in Benghazi, but nobody's really at fault. And nobody is going to be disciplined. How many of you saw that coming? I did.
The Associated Press is now reporting that a U.S. State Department security chief and two others have proffered their resignations after the report on what led up to that Benghazi attack came out.
There was a breakdown in Benghazi on September 11th that is stark and challenging to all of us in public life.
It's imperative that Secretary Clinton do testify in an open setting prior to any new Secretary of State being confirmed.
The buildings at Special Mission Benghazi did not meet department standards for office buildings in high threat areas.
People are at risk. It's a dangerous world we're in. And I think that this report is going to significantly advance the security interests of those personnel and of our country.
At the time of the attacks, the compound did not have all the security features and equipment it needed.
When I read the independent panel review today that said mistakes were made, but that nobody was at fault and that nobody is going to be disciplined, I was so shocked by that outcome. I almost fainted and I almost got a concussion.
Earlier today and after the release of the ARB State Department report, 3 State Department employees resigned. So is Benghazi now settled, or are there still unanswered questions? What does Governor Sarah Palin think? She joins us. Good evening, Governor, and your thought tonight about the report out of the State Department internal report.
Well, as someone said today, quite ironic that there's an admittance of mistakes being made, but nobody made them. Nobody's really taking responsibility for the mistakes being made. I look forward to hearing Secretary Clinton when she does have opportunity to testify, because there are so many unanswered questions. And kudos to Fox News for being the news outlet that stayed on top of the story. Americans deserve these answers.
I must say, with some level of pride, I mean, all the sort of heat we took from people saying that it wasn't a story, and indeed today, even you have Senator Dick Durbin saying mistakes were made. I mean, there was a lot of resistance. My colleagues, for instance, were kept from a State Department conference call when everybody in the media was briefed. Then the CIA had a briefing, and they didn't include Fox News. And then there was a security, the DNI released a report, and everybody got it but Fox News. So there's been a lot of resistance to my national security colleagues getting this information, so I do take some pride with them. The fact that 3 resigned today, what does that mean?
Well,
I guess it's 4. I'm being told it's 4.
Is significant. Okay, that's significant, but still, Greta, I think that the bottom line that is so frustrating to Americans is we were deceived. We were led in a season of electioning and campaigning that led to believe something that was other than truth. Americans were lied to, and yeah, some heads are rolling now, but again, still so many questions that have not been answered, and it just really illustrates that lack of transparency in the Obama administration. For the president even to get out there on a national stage and tell Americans untruths about this situation in Benghazi really begs you to ask the question, what else does he say and do that would be deceptive? I believe it's many, many things that he would say and do being deceptive.
Well, it certainly is curious. There were 2 letters sent by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton late last night, to the chairman of the 2 Foreign Relations Committee in the House and the Senate, and she talks about how immediately their eyes were on al-Qaeda. And if the eyes were on al-Qaeda, there's suspicion, what in the world, where did this video stuff come up with? And they kept pushing it. The president, of course, Ambassador Rice did, the president did on Letterman, on The View. You know, I mean, that still is so unanswered. Like, what in the world were they trying to do with that video business?
Well, bottom line is during the campaign in those final days, Barack Obama wanted to keep that false narrative alive that he, Mr. Nobel Peace Prize winning president of ours, he pretty much quashed the terrorist activities, if you will, of some of these Islamic countries that he was able to reach out and kind of stem the tide of that hatred and the violence coming from some of these countries as it pertained to relationships with Americans. And that's not true. I mean, they even told Americans that Al-Qaeda was on the run, and that is not true. Maybe they're on the run, but it's towards America, not away from America, and that played out in Benghazi.
Well, that's certainly peculiar they would say that, because my colleague Catherine Herridge saw an August 16th classified cable in which there were complaints that there were 10 al-Qaeda training camps in the area of Benghazi. So it's a little bit hard to say that al-Qaeda was on the run at that point. But let me ask you about something else, Governor. Time Magazine announcing its Person of the Year. Once again, it's President Obama. Now, Time Magazine says it is for the time the president's success in, quote, forging a new majority to create a more perfect union. Governor Palin, your thoughts on that?
The path towards a more perfect union is our Constitution, and I think that we have seen examples of our president not necessarily following the Constitution, in fact, wanting to change the Constitution because he sees it as a charter of negatives, and he's made statements in the past about his view of our Constitution, and that's following it is the blueprint towards a more perfect union. But Time Magazine, I think there's some irrelevancy there, to tell you the truth. I mean, consider their list of the most influential people in the country and in the world, some who have made that list. Yours truly. That ought to tell you something right there regarding the credence that we should give Time Magazine and their list of people.
All right. Well, that's an interesting concept, but it's funny. In looking at the president's choice, he was chosen before because when he was first elected. But the thing that strikes me is that I can't. It's Time Magazine that says this sort of goofy stuff about whatever their criteria is for seeking amid great adversity create a more perfect union. Exactly what that means, I don't know. But that's Time Magazine. That isn't the president. The president didn't pick those words. That's Time Magazine. So I point my finger at Time Magazine when it gets a little silly. How about you?
I think that those are some silly words chosen to describe Barack Obama. When I first heard that, the first thing that popped into my mind was, what the heck has he done? What has he done except drive us over a fiscal cliff, which we are over, and now it's time to fill the thud at the bottom of that cliff. It's just now a matter of a degree of how hard we're going to hit bottom. But, other than that, really, what has he done to unify and make our nation a more perfect union? For the life of me, I don't know, Greta.
Well, if the Standard had been successfully winning a hotly contested election, I would give him Time Magazine. I would put him on the cover for that, because that certainly was a hotly contested race. But let me turn to another issue. A Christian American pastor locked up in Iran. Reverend Saeed Abedini was born in Iran, but he is a U.S. citizen. Now, he was arrested back in September when he was on a trip to Iran to visit his parents. Before coming to the United States, Abedini spent years as a leader in Iran's underground Christian community, organizing churches and handing out Bibles in the streets. And Iran has not yet formally charged him with a crime, but when the Revolutionary Guard arrested him, he was told he would have to pay for his Christian missionary work. His family, of course, is desperate to bring him home, has reached out to our State Department. No luck there, at least not so far. So, Governor Palin, your thought tonight about a Christian in Iran who is now in custody?
I do hope the State Department will get involved in this. He is a U.S. citizen, and I think this illustrates, too, though, that brutality, that lack of freedom in these Islamic countries, and makes you wonder, why is it that we're led to believe, Americans collectively, led to believe that perhaps it's just a fine thing for Americans to be willing to spend and shed our own blood and treasure to usher in Sharia democracy in the Middle East, when Sharia law does call for apostates, those who would convert to Christianity, they can be put to death. Why is it that we would advocate, especially sending our sons and daughters in conflict, they being willing to make the ultimate sacrifice to usher in Sharia democracy in the Middle East? We really need to rethink what it is that we're doing in some of these countries, and our monetary support and military support in some of these countries that would ever support such a thing.
Well, you know, it's so interesting. If you look at the flip side, imagine, I mean, a Christian converting to become a Muslim, we would never, you know, stone the person or sentence the person to death or anything else. I mean, you know, the enormous amount of tolerance in this country, and yet so many of our, you know, so many Americans facing just the opposite other places.
And Greta, that is the most excellent point. Thank you for making that point. This is America. We have these freedoms, and we are willing to fight and die for our freedoms. That's why it's so extremely important to protect our Constitution. We are tolerant of other religions and other viewpoints, and nowhere else but America do we have such a privilege, such a blessing to be able to live as we do.
We could do a lot better, though, in terms of recognizing people's rights here. I will say that, but I'm going to take the last word on that. Governor, thank you. And now let's go back to the Benghazi report.